They came just before dusk, when the desert heat finally loosened its grip and the shadows stretched long across the sand. 3 men who mistook silence for surrender and tradition for weakness, riding hard and laughing louder than the wind, convinced that fear lived in every Apache camp they passed. And when they saw her standing alone near the dry fence line, dark hair braided, eyes calm as still water, they believed fate had handed them easy profit, never asking who she was or why she stood unguarded, because men like that never ask questions they don't want answered. She didn't scream when they grabbed her, didn't fight when the rope bit into her wrists, only watched them with a look that unsettled even the boldest among them. A look that carried memory, blood, and promise. And as they dragged her away toward the abandoned ranch beyond the dunes, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath, because she was not just an Apache woman. She was Neol of the Red Mesa, last blood of a warrior line, raised on stories of honor and survival, taught that every action sends ripples through time. And while the men argued over whiskey and ransom, she counted heartbeats and listened for signs, knowing the land as one knows their own skin, knowing that somewhere far beyond the fading sun, an old name still carried weight, a name spoken only in whispers now, a man whose guns once ended wars before they began, a man who had sworn long ago that no chain would ever bind Apache blood again. And as night fell cold and sharp, she pressed her bound hands together and whispered a prayer not for rescue, but for reckoning. Because if you're listening to this story right now, you're already standing at the edge of something legendary, and stories like this deserve to be remembered, shared and followed, so stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe. Because this is only the beginning. Miles away, where the desert turns rough and the stars burn brighter than any fire, an old man sat alone beside a dying flame, his coat worn thin by years and regret, his revolver resting close not out of habit but out of respect, because some things earn their place by history alone. And when the wind shifted, it carried something with it. Not a sound, not a cry, but a feeling, the kind only men who've buried brothers and promises recognize. And his hand stilled as the fire popped, because he knew that feeling. Had sworn he'd never feel it again, yet there it was, sharp and undeniable, like a blade pressing against memory. And the name he hadn't spoken in decades surfaced uninvited. Apache blood, Red Mesa line, the girl he'd once lifted onto a horse and told never to trust men who smiled too easy. And without ceremony or hesitation, he stood. Because legends don't rise for glory. They rise because something sacred has been threatened. And by the time the moon reached its highest point, he was already riding, coat snapping in the wind, horse cutting through sand like it remembered the way, every mile erasing years, because time bends for those who've already paid its price. And at the ranch, the men laughed louder to drown out the silence, unaware that the desert itself had shifted against them, unaware that every fence post, every grain of sand now carried witness. And if you're feeling that tension tighten in your chest, that's the power of stories passed down like scars, stories that only grow stronger when shared. So if this tale has you hooked, take a moment to subscribe, because what's coming next is the moment the past finally catches up. By the time the sky began to pale, the ranch stood quiet in the way prey grows quiet before the strike, and the first man never even heard the shot, just felt the sudden absence of breath where life had been. The second reached for his gun and found fear faster, because some men recognize death not by sight but by reputation. And when he saw the figure at the fence, hat low, stance relaxed, revolver steady as sunrise, he knew the stories were true, that the gunslinger who once ended blood, feuds with a single walk into town, had returned, not for vengeance but for balance. And Neol felt it too, felt the rope loosen as hands that never shook worked fast and sure, felt the presence of someone who didn't need to say her name because he already knew it. And when the last man tried to run, the desert denied him, because legends don't chase, they wait. And the gunshot echoed like a final word written in stone, and as the sun crested the horizon, painting the land gold, the gunslinger stood at the fence just as the title foretold, not triumphant, not proud, just finished, because justice isn't loud, it's complete. And as Neol stepped free into the light, she didn't thank him, she nodded, because warriors don't trade gratitude, they trade understanding. And if this moment gave you chills, if you felt the weight of every step that led here, then you already know why subscribing matters. Because stories like this don't end, they live on through those who choose to hear them. They buried the past with the night and let the sunrise carry the truth forward. A truth that would travel faster than bullets ever could, that the desert still remembers its guardians, that Apache blood is not a prize, and that legends never die, they just wait, And as the gunslinger turned back toward the endless horizon, refusing offers, refusing praise, he left behind something stronger than fear. He left memory. And memory is what keeps evil cautious. And Neil returned to her people not as a victim, but as a reminder, teaching the young that strength is quiet, patience is deadly, and that knowing who you are is the sharpest weapon you'll ever carry. And somewhere, long after hoofprints vanished, men would still lower their voices when speaking of fences at sunrise, of a woman they never should have touched, and of a gunslinger who came not like thunder, but like inevitability. And if you've stayed with this story until the end, you're part of that memory now. So subscribe, share, and stay with us, because the next legend is already waiting to be told.